After the moon missions, NASA launched a space station called Skylab. It was actually the top part of the Saturn V rocket that they had used to send astronauts to the moon. And there were 3 manned missions to Skylab in 1973 and 1974. The purpose of Skylab was for astronauts to learn how to live for extended times in space. And then after 3 missions, the Skylab space station was abandoned in 1974. Nobody ever went back to it, and it fell back to Earth in 1979. All right, the very last Apollo mission was the first international space mission. It was called Apollo-Soyuz. A NASA spacecraft, this Apollo spacecraft, met up with a Russian Soyuz spacecraft, this one over here, in orbit in 1975. It was the first time that 2 countries had ever met up in space, and of course United States and Soviet Union, Russia were the only countries at that time that could launch humans into space. And it was kind of a historic meeting because at the time, it was during the Cold War still, United States and Soviet Union were not friendly with each other, so this was a very, very historic meetup in space. In fact, there was not another international space mission until 1995. So it was very interesting, historic, and anyway. Now let's talk about the space shuttle. I think everybody's pretty familiar with the space shuttle. The space shuttle was first launched in 1981. Remember it very well. I saw it on TV. I was 9 years old when that happened. It could carry up to 7 astronauts to orbit. It could carry satellites to orbit and bring them back from orbit. That was supposed to be one of the things that made the space shuttle useful. It was used to carry parts of the International Space Station to orbit. However, even with all the missions of the space shuttle, there were 2 space shuttles that were destroyed in flight. Space Shuttle Challenger in 1986 was destroyed during launch. It exploded. And Space Shuttle Columbia was destroyed in 2003 when it was trying to re-enter Earth's atmosphere to come back from space. And each time, 7 astronauts lost their lives. So that's a total of 14 NASA astronauts that have died because of the space shuttle. All right. The last flight of the space shuttle was in 2011, 30 years after the first flight. And so why did NASA quit flying the space shuttle? Well, first of all, the system was like 30 years old. And think about that. How many of us drive 30-year-old cars? Not really very many. The average age of cars on the road is 10 years. So you imagine taking a spacecraft into orbit that is 30 years old. Now, it has been, of course, updated and maintained, but it's just, it's an old system. It was also pretty expensive to build and launch it, because the only part that came back from space was the shuttle itself. The tank and the boosters were used up each time, so it was still pretty expensive to use it. NASA wanted a cheaper system, so they quit using it. So right now, we have no way to launch astronauts into space unless they go to Russia and ride a Russian rocket. Okay, now let's talk about the International Space Station. All right, this picture right here is of the International Space Station, and the length of it is about as long as a football field. It's about 100 yards long, and the width is almost of these solar panels and everything is almost as wide as a football field. So it's a pretty large object in space. If when it's orbiting overhead during the nighttime, you can go outside and you can actually see it. All right. The International Space Station, or ISS, is an orbiting laboratory in space where up to 6 astronauts can live and work for months. It was built one piece or one module at a time, starting in 1998. By 2011, there were 15 pressurized models. It's almost complete, but it can always have stuff added to it. Astronauts from many countries live and conduct science experiments in the microgravity of the space station. Now, right now, currently, only Russia can launch spacecraft to the International Space Station, but pretty soon the United States will be able to launch spacecraft again, and who knows, maybe another country some year will be able to also launch spacecraft there. So the exact dimensions, it's 239 feet long, so almost a football field, and 356 feet wide. You can see it flying over the night as the sun reflects off the solar panels. Alright, so it's just a place for astronauts to live and work and study in space. Alright, so let's talk about unmanned space exploration. I realize we've actually explored most of the planets of our solar system using unmanned space probes, and we've explored a lot of Mars with unmanned rovers like this one. Alright, space probes are robotic spacecraft that are sent to explore places in the solar system that are too far for humans to explore. As they travel to other planets in the solar system, they send back pictures and other data gathered by instruments on the spacecraft. Rovers are robots that have been sent to explore the surface of other planets such as Mars. There are currently several rovers exploring Mars, and they're still going around studying the planet and sending back pictures and data. Alright, the advantages of unmanned space exploration: it's less expensive and safer than human spaceflight, and probes can go places that humans cannot. I mean, it takes months to get to Mars. It takes years to get to the outer planets, and so that is currently too long for humans to be in space. So it's necessary to send unmanned space probes. The disadvantages are robots cannot do everything that humans can, obviously, and if the probes or the rovers break, there's no one there to fix them. So if something goes wrong, you quit getting signals back from it, it's over. You can't do anything. Alright. Even Pluto has been explored. This past year, you might remember seeing in the news that New Horizons space probe flew by Pluto and sent back the first close-up photos of this dwarf planet. Okay, this is what the New Horizons probe looks like. Of course, it has a huge antenna because it's so far away. It has to send the data back that far. And then this is a picture of Pluto from close by, from the New Horizons. And this is a picture of Pluto and its moon Charon from the New Horizons probe. Alright, so what's the future of space exploration? Alright, let's talk about the commercial crew launch. Since the NASA space shuttle was retired in 2011, NASA right now has no way to send astronauts to the International Space Station. So NASA has hired several companies to build spacecraft to launch astronauts. Alright, so they're currently working on building spacecraft and rockets to launch astronauts from the United States for NASA. Okay, the SpaceX Dragon, which is this spacecraft right here, which launches on this Falcon rocket right here, or the Boeing CST-100, this spacecraft right here, will likely be the first commercial crew spacecraft to launch astronauts, and it looks like they will be able to do that in about 2017, so about a year from now. We should see these spacecraft launching astronauts for NASA from the United States. Alright, there's this spacecraft right here. I forget what the name of it was, but it didn't end up being finished in time to be able to compete. So it would be either this Dragon crew or the Boeing. In fact, they might both be able to launch, and so then we would have two different companies that can launch astronauts for NASA. Alright, and then let's talk about NASA's next spacecraft is the Orion spacecraft, and this is a drawing of what the Orion will look like, and this is a drawing of what the Orion will look like being launched on its rocket. Okay, the Orion will be able to carry up to 7 astronauts to places as far away as the Moon or even possibly Mars. All right. The rocket that will launch Orion is called the Space Launch System. This rocket here. And once it's built, the SLS, Space Launch System, will be the most powerful rocket ever built. Okay? It'll be even more powerful than the Saturn rocket that sent the Apollo astronauts to the moon. All right? Orion and the Space Launch System will be ready to launch around 2020. So, about 5 years from now. Maybe a little sooner. It just depends on when they get finished with it. They've actually already built some Orion spacecraft, and they sent one into orbit over in a smaller rocket just as a test. It didn't have any humans on board. It just went up for a test. So NASA is definitely working on Orion and getting it ready. All right. So what would you do? What would NASA's next missions be beyond going just to the International Space Station? Okay. So with Orion spacecraft and the SLS rocket, NASA hopes to be able to return to the moon, maybe land on an asteroid, kind of like this picture right here, and possibly send humans to Mars. Okay. The moon or asteroid missions are short enough to be safe for humans. Okay. It takes only a few days to get to the moon, and probably a matter of weeks to get to an asteroid that they could land on. But missions to Mars could take 1 to 2 years, and right now it's unclear. We're not sure whether being in space this long is safe for humans. I mean, right now there is a one man on the International Space Station that is staying up there for a year, and they're going to study what happens to his body for being in space that long. But there's lots of things that happen to you while you're in space that's not good for your body. So, we're going to see if that's possible. All right. Some people question whether it's worth the money and the risk to humans to explore space. Why send people up there? Will it be harmful to their health and cost millions, if not billions of dollars? People say, why do that when we can just send space probes? Okay. Other people believe that we must explore space to learn more about the universe and our solar system. So it's still debatable. All right. If NASA did decide to go to Mars on a Mars mission, it probably wouldn't happen before the year 2030. So that's at least 15 years from now. And, there's still currently no plan to do that. So it's up for the future.